He walked through the polished floors of the tall office building every morning, pushing his cart of cleaning supplies quietly down the long hallways. The walls gleamed under the soft lighting, reflecting the images of people who moved quickly, talking on phones and typing on keyboards. He was just a janitor, or at least that's how the world saw him. To him, this building was a place of routine, of quiet labor, and a small escape from his otherwise hard life. He had worked there for a few months now, and although nobody paid much attention to him, he had learned to notice everything. The way the receptionist tapped her pen nervously during calls. The way the interns whispered to each other, pretending to know what they were doing. The way the CEO, a man with a sharp suit and sharper gaze, walked with his presence commanding every room he entered. The CEO was a man of authority, feared by many, admired by some, and largely misunderstood by those who had never spoken to him directly. The janitor had always been interested in music. When he was a boy, he had spent hours trying to play on an old keyboard his parents had managed to buy. He had no teacher, no lessons, only a stubborn desire to make something beautiful with his hands. Chopin had always been his favorite. There was something in the way the notes fell that reminded him of both hope and sadness at the same time. Life had not been kind to him, but the music offered a world where things made sense. The first time he heard the CEO speak to him directly, he almost dropped his mop. It was a casual comment in the break room, but the words hit him like a thunderbolt. The CEO leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips, and said, almost jokingly, "If you play Chopin for me, I'll marry you." Everyone in the room laughed, including a few assistants and employees who happened to be there. The janitor froze, unsure how to react. He was embarrassed, but he could not shake the words from his mind. It was a strange joke, certainly, but it lingered in a way that made his heart race. He went back to his work, pushing his cart down the hallways, but the laughter and the words of the CEO echoed in his mind. He thought about what it would mean if he could actually play. Not for marriage, not for approval, but just to see if he could reach that level. It had been years since he had touched a piano, years since he had felt the keys beneath his fingers. In the way that made his soul feel alive, that evening he returned home to his small apartment. The kitchen was cramped, with peeling paint on the walls, and a single lamp that cast a yellow glow over everything. He sat at the small table and stared at the floor, thinking, could he really do it? Did he even remember how to play? And yet, the challenge, strange as it was, sparked something inside him. It was not the CEO, not the joke, but the idea of proving to himself that he could still create music that moved people. Over the next few days, he started to find excuses to spend time near the office piano. He would linger after work, pretending to organize supplies in the music room, while secretly pressing keys lightly, testing his memory. The notes felt familiar, and yet foreign. His fingers stumbled at first, and his confidence wavered, but the moment his hands found the flow, a warmth spread through him that reminded him why he loved music in the first place. It was private, small, and fleeting, but it was his dot as he practiced in secret. He began to notice the world around him differently. The laughter of employees in the hallway no longer felt annoying. It felt like background music to his own rhythm. He noticed the way the sunlight reflected off the windows in the lobby, how it created patterns on the floor, reminding him of sheet music he had once tried to read. The office, once just a place of work, became a quiet stage where he could imagine the music filling every corner. The CEO, meanwhile, carried on with his days as usual, unaware of the small yet determined efforts happening behind the scenes. He continued to make sharp observations, challenging employees, making them feel both fear and admiration. But the janitor stayed in his own world, preparing quietly, learning to translate years of forgotten skill into something tangible once more. One evening, as the janitor played a particularly difficult passage from Chopin's Nocturne, he felt a rush of emotion he hadn't felt in years. The notes flowed from his fingers with a fluidity that surprised him, as though the music had been waiting dormant for him to remember it. The room was empty, silent, and he allowed himself a small smile. He was not performing for anyone but himself, and yet it felt important. The challenge was no longer about a joke or the CEO's words. It was about proving to himself that he still had a gift, a voice that could speak without words. He began to practice every evening after work. His body ached, his fingers grew sore, and sometimes he would stumble and feel the sting of frustration. But he kept going, driven by a quiet determination that grew stronger each day. Music was no longer just a hobby. It had become a mission, a path he had rediscovered in the most unlikely place. His fellow janitors began to notice small changes. He moved with a lighter step, smiled more often, hummed to himself as he worked. Some of the office staff, passing by, caught glimpses of him pressing keys softly and paused for a moment, curious. The world around him began to feel less like a rigid, unchanging space and more like a canvas where small miracles could happen. The janitor often thought about the CEO's words during these practices. The idea of marriage was absurd, yes, but there was something symbolic about it. The challenge was not really about romance. It was about recognition, about being seen in a world where people often ignored him. If he could play well enough to surprise the CEO, to silence the laughter and disbelief, he would have shown that even someone in a humble uniform could possess extraordinary talent. Days turned into weeks. The janitor's skills returned. Surprising speed. Each session brought him closer to mastery, and he began to imagine the moment when someone would hear him play for real. The fantasy of performing in front of the CEO became a secret dream, one that gave him energy, even on the most exhausting days. He imagined the look of surprise, the pause, the silent acknowledgement that the music had moved him. He also reflected on his life outside of the office. The small apartment, the tight budget, the lack of opportunity, these had all shaped him, but they had not broken him. Music was his escape, his expression, and perhaps his way to connect with a world that had often overlooked him. He realized that this journey was bigger than the office, bigger than a single challenge. It was about reclaiming a part of himself that he had almost forgotten. One evening, after finishing a particularly intense practice, he sat in the quiet room and let his hands rest on the keys. He could feel the vibrations of the last note lingering in the air, and he allowed himself to breathe deeply. There was a sense of anticipation, a quiet thrill that pulsed through him. Something was about to happen, something he could not yet name. The journey had only begun, but already he could feel the change inside him. The office building, usually so ordinary and impersonal, now felt alive with possibility. Every hallway, every window, every echo of sound seemed to be part of the story. He was creating with his music. He realized that the challenge had given him more than just a task to complete. It had given him purpose, direction, and a renewed sense of self-dash. Worth dot, as the janitor left the building that night, he paused to look at the lights of the city outside. The streets were bustling, people moving in every direction, but he felt a quiet separation from the chaos. He carried within him the soft hum of Chopin's notes, a melody that no one else could hear, yet one that guided every step he took. He knew that when the time came, he would play with all his heart, not for the CEO, not for anyone else, but for the music itself, and for the man he had become along the way. And so, each day, he continued his work in the building, pushing the cart, cleaning the floors, moving unseen through a world that often ignored him. But at night, he returned to the piano, to the place where his soul could speak. The laughter, the challenge, The absurd joke from the CEO, all of it became fuel, propelling him toward something greater. Little did he know that the moment he had been preparing for was closer than he imagined, and when it came, it would change everything in ways he could never have foreseen. Each evening, after the last employees had left the office building and the corridors fell silent, the janitor returned to the small music room tucked away in a quiet corner. The piano stood there, slightly dusty, its black and white keys waiting patiently for someone to bring life to them. He had started practicing, in secret, unsure if anyone would ever hear him play. But now, after several weeks, it felt less like a secret and more like a ritual. The music filled the empty office, echoing softly against the high ceilings, carrying with it the weight of all his hopes and fears at home. He lived simply. A small apartment with a worn sofa, a little kitchen that barely held more than the phone. Essentials, and a single lamp that cast a soft glow over the room. It was not much, but it was his space, a place where he could think, rest, and dream. He often thought about the life he had imagined for himself when he was younger, the life where music was not just a fleeting hobby, but a central part of who he was. That dream had faded over the years, buried under the demands of reality, cleaning floors, emptying trash, and moving silently through office corridors had become his daily routine, leaving little room for anything else. But the piano had awakened something long dormant within him. His fingers moved carefully at first, testing passages of Chopin that had once come naturally. Each note was a conversation with the past, with memories of when he first touched a keyboard as a child. Slowly, the melodies began to flow more freely. The music was no longer just sound. It became a reflection of his emotions, a mirror to his soul. He practiced late into the night, sometimes losing track of time, until the distant hum of the city reminded him that the world outside still moved forward. There were challenges. His fingers would ache, sometimes stiff from long hours of repetition. Certain passages refused to cooperate, and he had to stop and breathe, frustrated by the stubbornness of his own hands. Yet each small victory brought a rush of satisfaction. He began to notice subtle improvements, the way a note lingered just a little longer, the way his timing became steadier, the way the music felt more alive. It was not just about hitting the right keys anymore. It was about expression, emotion, and letting the music speak for him. The office itself, once a place of anonymity, had started to feel more like a stage. He would imagine that he was not alone, that someone important was listening. This vision gave him purpose. It pushed him to practice longer, to pay attention to every nuance, and to invest not just time, but his very heart into each performance. He wanted to be ready for the moment that might never come, the moment when his music would be witnessed by someone who had once doubted his talent. He noticed changes in himself, too. His confidence, quiet but steady, began to grow. The small interactions with employees in the hallways felt lighter. Even the way he pushed his cart of supplies seemed different, less like a man moving through life unseen, and more like someone carrying a piece of something meaningful wherever he went. The music was transforming him, preparing him for challenges he did not yet understand. At home, he kept a simple routine. Breakfast was usually just a cup of tea and toast. He spent some time reading, occasionally leafing through an old music book he had found at a thrift store. The pages were yellowed, the notes slightly faded, but they reminded him of a world he had almost forgotten. These quiet moments were essential. They grounded him, gave him perspective, and strengthened the resolve that carried him back to the piano each night. He also began to pay attention to the world outside the office. He noticed small acts of kindness, like the neighbor who helped carry groceries, or the bus driver who greeted everyone with a smile. These moments, seemingly ordinary, reminded him that life had layers beyond the monotony of routine. The piano, the office, the late-night practices, they were one layer. But the world outside was another, full of human connection, empathy, and stories waiting to unfold. One evening, as he practiced a particularly difficult nocturne, he realized that he was no longer just playing for himself. He was playing for the possibilities that life could hold. Each note was a step toward something bigger than his current existence, a declaration that talent and perseverance could exist even in places where they were least expected. The office walls, silent witnesses to his dedication, seemed to resonate with the energy of his commitment. It was as though the building itself had begun to recognize his effort. The janitor's thoughts often returned to the CEO's strange comment. Initially, it had been an embarrassing moment, a joke meant to provoke laughter. But now it had become a symbol of aspiration. It was a spark that had reignited a dormant part of himself. The words were no longer a joke. They were a challenge, a call to excellence. He knew that he might never actually perform for the CEO, but the idea of striving toward that possibility fueled his late-night sessions. It was not about approval or recognition. It was about testing the limits of his own abilities. Sometimes, the janitor imagined the reactions of those who doubted him. The office employees who barely noticed him as he mopped the floors. The interns who thought he was invisible. The CEO, whose sharp gaze could intimidate anyone. In his mind, the music flowed differently depending on the imagined audience. For those who doubted, it became a declaration of skill and dedication. For those who appreciated, it became an expression of shared emotion. The piano became a bridge between himself and the world, a way to communicate without words. He also began to document his progress, not in words, but in memory and in subtle recordings on his phone, just to track how his fingers and understanding of the music evolved. Each week brought noticeable improvement. A passage that had once been impossible now felt natural. A chord that had been awkward became smooth and expressive. The growth was tangible, and it gave him a quiet pride that no one in the office could have guessed existed behind his uniform. Outside, life continued in its usual rhythm. People hurried to their meetings, laughed over coffee, and navigated the complexities of office life. The janitor moved among them silently, his role unchanged, to the casual observer. But within him, a transformation was underway. The music had given him a renewed sense of purpose, a way to reclaim a part of himself that had long been dormant. He felt alive in a way he had not for years, and that vitality seeped into every corner of his existence. He began to experiment with interpretation, not just playing the notes as written, but adding subtle nuances, changing tempo slightly to reflect emotion, letting the pauses breathe. The piano became a canvas for creativity, a place where technique met feeling. This was new to him. Before, he had only played mechanically, following instructions from memory. Now, he was alive with intuition, shaping the music with every thought. Every heartbeat, every touch of the key's dot as the weeks passed, his confidence grew, though it remained quiet and measured. He did not boast or seek attention. He simply practiced, honed, and prepared. The anticipation of a possible audience lingered in his mind, but it was no longer the driving force. The music itself, the joy of creating something beautiful, became the reward. Each session brought him closer to mastery, and with mastery came the calm certainty that he was on the right path. At home, he allowed himself small celebrations of progress. A perfectly executed passage might be met with a quiet nod or a small smile. Mistakes were not failures, but lessons, and he began to cherish the process as much as the result. The journey, he realized, was as important as any destination. Music had given him patience, focus, and a deep appreciation for the subtleties of life, both in sound and in human experience. He started to notice how others in the building reacted to him differently, even in small ways. People would nod in acknowledgement or offer a brief smile as he passed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it reinforced the sense that his dedication was visible in some form, even if they did not know why. These small moments of recognition became a source of encouragement, a quiet validation that his efforts were not entirely invisible. The janitor's evenings became a rhythm of work, reflection, and practice. He would clean the offices during the day, go home to rest, and return at night to the piano, with a world narrowed to the notes beneath his fingers. Time seemed to stretch and contract in these sessions. Hours could pass without notice, and yet he always emerged from the music with a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that he had grown, even if just a little, with each session. Slowly, a new identity began to take shape. He was no longer just a janitor, no longer just a man moving through life unnoticed. He was a musician in secret, a creator who could wield emotion with his hands, and someone who had discovered a path back to his dreams. The music reminded him daily that no circumstance, no title, no external judgment could diminish the power of talent and dedication. And so, each night, he returned to the piano with a quiet determination. Each note, each passage, each pause was a step toward mastery, a step toward self-realization, and a step toward the moment when the music would no longer be private. He knew that the journey would continue, that challenges would remain, and that the world outside would not pause for his progress. But he also knew that he was ready to meet those challenges one note at a time, and that the music inside him was stronger than any doubt, stronger than any fear, and more powerful than any silence surrounding him. The office building had grown quieter in the evenings, but the CEO's presence was still felt even when he was gone. Employees often whispered about his sharp comments, his demanding expectations, and the rare glimpses of humor he allowed himself. The janitor, though usually invisible to the world around him, had begun to feel a subtle shift. Something was changing, and he sensed it even if he could not yet name it. It started one afternoon when the janitor was quietly cleaning the office floors near the CEO's private office. He noticed the door slightly open, and through it, he saw the CEO seated behind his desk, papers scattered, a pen in hand, looking more thoughtful than usual. The janitor worked slowly, careful not to make a sound. Normally, the CEO paid little attention to him, but this time, the man's eyes flicked up, meeting his briefly. There was a spark of curiosity in the gaze, a silent question that made the janitor's heart quicken. Was the CEO thinking about the joke he had made weeks ago? Or had something else caught his attention? Over the next few days, small, subtle things began to happen. The janitor would hear faint laughter in the hallways, whispers that seemed to stop when he approached. Employees who normally ignored him would glance his way, then quickly look down. It was as if someone had begun to notice, even if no one said anything aloud. And then there were the unexpected moments when the CEO himself would pause, glance in his direction, and return to his work with a thoughtful expression. It was not obvious, not loud, but it was enough to make the janitor feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. He began to wonder if his late-night practices were starting to have an effect beyond the private walls of the music room. Perhaps the office building, usually so indifferent, had begun to carry whispers of his dedication. The thought filled him with both pride and nervousness. He continued practicing with care, making sure each note, each phrase, was precise and full of feeling. He imagined the possibility that one day someone might actually hear him and understand the depth of what he could create. At home, he reflected on his progress. His hands were stronger, more flexible, and his memory had returned to pieces he thought he had forgotten. Yet the challenge of certain Chopin passages still tested him. Some notes felt stubborn under his fingers, resisting the flow of his emotions. He would pause, breathe, and return, over and over until the music sounded as he intended. Each triumph was celebrated quietly, a small victory in a world that often offered little recognition. One afternoon, as he cleaned near the CEO's office, the door opened slightly and the man called out. The janitor froze, unsure if he had heard correctly. The CEO's voice was calm, measured, but there was an edge of curiosity. "Do you play music?" he asked, not as a joke this time, but as a question meant to explore. The janitor's fingers paused mid-wipe. "I used to," he replied softly. The CEO nodded and returned to his work, leaving the janitor with a sense of unease and anticipation. This was no longer a casual remark. It was a test of attention, of skill, and perhaps even of character. The janitor began to imagine what it would be like if the CEO heard him play. He pictured the expression on the man's face, the shift from skepticism to surprise, maybe even admiration. It was a strange and thrilling thought. For years, he had lived in the margins, unseen and unheard. Now he had the chance, however small, to step into a spotlight he had never thought possible. The idea filled him with determination, and he returned to the piano each night with renewed focus. The employees, unaware of the inner journey unfolding, continued their routines. Some noticed the janitor lingering near the music room, but they paid little attention. A few curious interns would peek in, catching glimpses of a man absorbed in music, and then quickly retreat. The janitor welcomed the privacy, the chance to explore his talent without external pressures. Yet the awareness that someone might eventually notice added a thrilling edge to his practice dot as he honed his skills. He also began to notice the subtleties of performance. It was not enough to hit the right keys. The music required expression, emotion, and timing. He experimented with tempo, with dynamics, letting the notes breathe and speak. Each evening, he became more attuned to this power of nuance, realizing that true artistry was in the details, in the small decisions that shaped the overall sound. The piano became more than an instrument. It became an extension of his thoughts, a voice for feelings he could not otherwise express. The CEO, meanwhile, continued his days with calculated precision. He noticed patterns, small details others overlooked, and the janitor's subtle transformation did not escape him entirely. He began to watch quietly, intrigued by the man who moved through the building with such purpose. It remained largely unnoticed. There was curiosity, a hint of amusement, and perhaps even a growing respect. The CEO, accustomed to evaluating talent in the obvious places, was starting to see that skill could emerge from unexpected corners. The janitor often imagined conversations that might never happen. He pictured telling the CEO about his life, about the years spent learning, struggling, and dreaming in silence. He imagined playing a piece flawlessly, not to impress, but to share a piece of himself in its purest form. These imagined scenarios motivated him to practice with intensity, to refine every phrase, every chord, and every pause until it conveyed exactly what he wanted to express. One night, after an especially long session, he sat quietly with his hands resting on the keys. The last note lingered in the air, and he let himself breathe deeply, absorbing the quiet that followed. He thought about the weeks of practice, the small triumphs, and the progress he had made. He realized that his journey was not just about impressing anyone else. It was about reclaiming a part of himself that had been neglected for too long. The piano had become a sanctuary, a space where he could reconnect with his identity, his dreams, and his deepest emotions. He began to notice how the music affected him physically and emotionally. His posture improved, his movements became more fluid, and a quiet confidence started to emerge. Even in mundane tasks like cleaning or organizing, he felt a sense of presence and purpose. The piano was teaching him patience, resilience, and the power of focused effort. It was a reminder that even small, consistent actions could lead to meaningful growth. The anticipation of potential recognition lingered at the back of his mind. He knew that someone might hear him one day, perhaps the CEO or another employee. The idea was both exhilarating and intimidating. He practiced imagining their reactions, the surprise, the silence, and perhaps even admiration. These mental rehearsals helped him refine his technique, shaping his interpretation of each piece with an awareness of how it might be received. Yet he reminded himself that the music was ultimately for him, a personal journey of rediscovery and expression. The janitor also began to pay attention to the world beyond the office. He noticed patterns in human behavior, subtle gestures, and unspoken communication. He observed how people responded to small acts of kindness, the way a smile could change the tone of a conversation, or how attentiveness could create connection. These observations informed his approach to music, teaching him to communicate emotion and narrative through sound, just as people communicated through actions and expressions. He started to experiment with different interpretations of the pieces. He played. A single chord could convey tension or resolution. A pause could suggest reflection or anticipation. He became aware of the power of silence, the importance of letting music breathe and resonate. Each practice session was not just a repetition of notes, but a study in emotion, storytelling, and human connection. The piano became a mirror to his inner world, a medium through which he could explore both his own experiences and the universal language of music. The office, still bustling with daytime activity, began to feel different to him. He noticed subtle changes in how people interacted, the rhythm of their movements, and the energy that filled the space. The building, once a backdrop to routine tasks, became a dynamic environment, responsive to his presence and his evolving skill. He felt a growing sense of belonging, not as a janitor or an observer, but as someone who contributed to the atmosphere, even if quietly and indirectly. The CEO's occasional glances continued to intrigue him. There was no explicit recognition, no direct acknowledgement, but the awareness of being observed added a layer of intensity to his practice. He imagined what it would mean if the CEO actually heard him play, if the moment of truth arrived and he could share his talent openly. This possibility fueled his dedication, driving him to practice with precision, creativity, and heart. The challenge had evolved from a joke into a quiet, motivating force, shaping his nights and defining his sense of purpose. As weeks turned into months, the janitor's confidence and skill grew steadily. He could navigate complex passages with ease, interpret the subtleties of each piece, and convey emotion through sound. The piano became an extension of his voice, a tool for communication that transcended words and titles. He began to understand that mastery was not just about technical ability, but about the ability to touch hearts and connect with others through art. Each evening, he approached the keys with a sense of reverence, dedication, and anticipation for the possibilities that lay ahead. And so, the janitor continued his nightly ritual, balancing the demands of work and life with the pursuit of musical excellence. Each note, each phrase, each pause brought him closer to self-discovery, refinement, and the moment when his efforts might finally be witnessed. The journey was ongoing, filled with challenges, triumphs, and quiet revelations. He knew that when the time came, he would be ready to share not just his skill, but the depth of his journey, leaving an impression that would resonate far beyond the office walls. The office was quiet that evening, the usual hum of activity replaced by a soft, expectant stillness. The janitor had finished his regular cleaning, pushing his cart slowly toward the music room. Tonight, he felt a different energy in the air. Something told him that the hours he had spent in preparation, the weeks of silent practice, were about to converge into a moment that might change everything. His heart beat faster as he approached the piano, each step measured, deliberate, yet filled with anticipation. He sat down, hands hovering above the keys, taking a deep breath. He had rehearsed this moment countless times in his mind, imagining the music flowing flawlessly, the notes rising and falling with precision and emotion. But now, faced with the quiet of the empty office, the reality felt more intense than any daydream. He pressed the first note, and a gentle sound filled the room, echoing softly against the walls. It was a cautious beginning, tentative, as if testing the space and the air itself. As he continued, the notes became more confident, each one carrying the emotion he had stored inside for so long. He thought about the journey that had led him here, the quiet determination, the late nights, the small victories and setbacks, the relentless pursuit of expression. Every note reflected a piece of that story, a narrative of resilience and passion that he had kept hidden from the world. The music became a bridge between his private struggles and the possibility of recognition, a silent communication that transcended words. He lost himself in the flow of the piece, the fingers moving with a grace that seemed almost effortless. The office, usually a place of rigid routine, seemed to breathe with him, the walls resonating with the vibrations of the piano. Shadows of furniture stretched across the floor, dancing subtly in the light, as though the building itself were acknowledging the music. The janitor felt a connection, not just to the instrument, but to the space, to the world outside, and to the life he had imagined for himself. Suddenly, a soft creak from the hallway caught his attention. He paused, unsure if someone had entered. But the sound did not deter him. He continued playing, the music gaining depth, richness, and complexity. It was no longer just a practice session. It was a performance, raw and real, infused with all the emotion he had nurtured over months of preparation. The notes seemed to take on a life of their own, rising and falling with a natural rhythm that was impossible to ignore. In the distance, the faint sound of footsteps grew closer. The janitor did not stop. He had anticipated this possibility, imagined it countless times, and now he allowed it to unfold naturally. The footsteps belonged to the CEO, who had entered quietly, curious about the faint strains of music drifting through the building. He paused at the doorway, his usual composed expression giving way to a flicker of surprise and intrigue. He had not expected to hear such mastery from the janitor, and the silence that followed the initial notes held him captivated. The janitor's focus did not waver. Every chord, every passage, every subtle nuance was deliberate, an expression of the countless hours of dedication that had brought him to this point. He played not to impress, not to seek approval, but to share a part of himself that had long been hidden. The music was a statement of presence, of identity, of resilience. The CEO watched, silently absorbing the unfolding performance, his usual authority softened by genuine astonishment. The office employees who happened to linger nearby were drawn by the sound. They paused, some hiding in doorways, others standing at a respectful distance. The janitor was unaware of them, fully immersed in the music, letting each note speak for him. The room was filled with a delicate tension, a mixture of expectation and revelation, as if the building itself held its breath to witness this unexpected moment of artistry. As the piece progressed, the janitor's confidence grew. He moved with a fluidity that belied his role as a janitor, each gesture precise, each expression intentional. He thought about the struggles he had faced, the obstacles overcome, and the persistence that had guided him through long nights of solitary practice. The music became a narrative, a reflection of his journey, a story without words, yet deeply understood by anyone who listened closely. The CEO, standing silently, felt a shift within himself. The man he had casually joked with, who had seemed invisible for months, was capable of moving an audience with skill and emotion. He was compelled to listen, to absorb every nuance, every subtle inflection, every heartfelt pause. The realization dawned that talent could exist anywhere, hidden in the most unlikely places, and that recognition often required patience, observation, and an open mind. The janitor continued, the piece reaching its climactic passages. His hands moved faster, yet with control, each note resonating with clarity and purpose. The office, once a place of strict hierarchy and routine, was transformed into a space of art, emotion, and human connection. The performance was not just about music. It was a testament to perseverance, passion, and the capacity for beauty to emerge from unexpected corners of life. As the final notes lingered, the room fell into profound silence. The janitor lifted his hands, allowing the last vibrations to fade naturally. He breathed deeply, feeling a mixture of relief, accomplishment, and quiet triumph. The performance had been real, unplanned, yet perfect in its honesty and expression. It was a culmination of months of preparation, a moment that validated every sacrifice, every late night, every ounce of effort. The CEO remained silent, his usual composure intact, but softened by the unexpected display of talent. He took a measured step forward, allowing the weight of the moment to settle. The janitor looked up, finally noticing the presence of the CEO and a few employees who had silently gathered. There was a pause, an unspoken acknowledgement, a recognition that transcended titles and roles. The music had spoken, and the room, the people, and even the building itself had listened. For the janitor, this moment was transformative. The journey that had started with a joke, a casual challenge, had evolved into an experience of revelation, both personal and communal. He realized that the true reward was not in external validation, but in the act of creating, in sharing a piece of his soul, and in witnessing the quiet impact that music could have on those around him. The employees, who had initially paused in curiosity, were visibly moved. Some exchanged glances, others held their breath as the power of the performance settled in the room. The janitor's dedication, skill, and emotional depth had created a shared experience, a connection between people who had previously seen each other only in passing. The music had bridged gaps, softened judgments, and revealed the human essence that often lay hidden beneath roles and responsibilities. The CEO finally spoke, his voice low, deliberate, and carrying a tone of respect that was rarely heard. "I did not expect that," he said, the simplicity of the statement amplifying its impact. The janitor nodded, a quiet acknowledgement, feeling the weight and sincerity of the words. It was not praise in the traditional sense, but a recognition of effort, talent, and authenticity. The moment was larger than a casual compliment. It was a validation of the journey, the struggle, and the dedication that had brought him to this point. The janitor's emotions were complex. There was pride, yes, but also humility. The performance had been a personal milestone, a testament to his resilience, and yet he remained aware of the ongoing journey. The music had opened a door, but the path beyond it was still uncharted, full of possibilities and challenges. He understood that this moment, while significant, was part of a larger narrative, one that would continue to unfold with each note, each practice session, and each encounter with the world outside the music room. The office returned to its quiet state, the hum of activity replaced by reflective stillness. The janitor, though still in his uniform, felt transformed. He had shared his talent, expressed his emotions, and touched the hearts of those around him. The piano, once a private sanctuary, had become a medium for connection, understanding, and recognition. He realized that the power of music lay not just in technical skill, but in the ability to convey emotion, to communicate what words could not, and to create shared experiences that resonated deeply with others. As he prepared to leave the music room, He allowed himself a moment to reflect on the journey that had led him here. The late nights, the persistent practice, the quiet determination, all had culminated in this performance. The unexpected presence of the CEO, the silent audience of employees, and the resonance of the music within the space had created a moment that would linger in his memory, a turning point in both his personal and professional life. Walking back through the empty hallways, the janitor felt a quiet satisfaction. The building, which had once felt imposing and impersonal, now seemed alive, filled with echoes of music, emotion, and human connection. The performance had not only changed how others perceived him, but also how he perceived himself. He had reclaimed a part of his identity, proven to himself that his talent was real, and discovered the profound impact that dedication, passion, and authenticity could have on the world around him. The night outside was calm, the city lights twinkling in the distance, reflecting a world of endless possibilities. The janitor paused briefly, taking in the view, feeling a sense of balance, achievement, and quiet anticipation for the future. The music had opened doors, created new paths, and sparked a journey that was far from over. And as he walked away, he knew that each step, each decision, each moment of effort would continue to shape the unfolding story of his life, guided by the power of music, resilience, and the courage to embrace opportunity when it appeared. The janitor sat back on the piano bench, his hands resting lightly on the keys, feeling the last vibrations of the notes fade into the stillness of the office. The room, once just a quiet corner in a bustling building, now held a weight of emotion, anticipation, and realization. He felt a strange mixture of relief and exhilaration. Months of practice, countless hours of solitude, and the quiet persistence of belief in himself had led to this moment. It was not simply the act of playing. It was the culmination of his journey, a testament to patience, determination, and the power of dreams held close to the heart. He became aware of the silence around him. The faint rustle of papers from the CEO's desk, the soft shuffle of feet from employees who had paused in the hallways, each sound accentuated the impact of what had just occurred. There was no immediate applause, no overt recognition, but that silence was meaningful. It was a pause filled with attention, with respect, with the recognition of talent emerging unexpectedly in a place where it had been largely ignored. The janitor allowed himself a quiet smile, acknowledging the profoundness of the moment. The CEO, standing a few steps away, had been watching intently, his usual composure giving way to genuine astonishment. The expression on his face was unreadable to the casual observer, but the janitor sensed the shift in energy. The CEO's eyes, sharp and analytical, were now softened with reflection and appreciation. There was a weight in the gaze that communicated more than words ever could, a recognition of skill, discipline, and the courage to present oneself honestly in the face of potential judgment. For the janitor, this was a moment of validation, not in the sense of ego or pride, but in the acknowledgement that years of quiet effort and personal struggle were not invisible. He had always carried a sense of being unseen, overlooked, or underestimated. Yet the music had provided a voice, a way to communicate the depth of his experiences, the texture of his perseverance, and the authenticity of his aspirations. In this silence, he felt seen in a manner that transcended titles, uniforms, and social hierarchies. The employees who had silently gathered were also affected. Some had their hands folded, lips pressed together, and eyes wide with surprise. Others shared subtle glances, as if communicating without words about the unexpected brilliance they had just witnessed. The janitor's performance had created a shared moment of awe, an unspoken connection that bridged the gap between individuals who had previously interacted only in routine, transactional ways. It was a reminder that talent and dedication could exist in places and people where they were least anticipated. The janitor took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the room settle. He did not speak immediately, understanding that the power of the music lingered in the air. Words at this moment would only dilute the impact. Instead, he allowed his presence, his calm composure, and the subtle poise of someone who had conquered personal challenges to communicate more than any speech could. His reaction, the humility, the quiet satisfaction, and the restrained pride resonated as profoundly as the music itself. The CEO finally broke the silence. His voice was measured, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who rarely expressed emotion so openly. "I did not expect that," he said, his tone both admiring and contemplative. There was no exaggeration, no performative compliment, just sincere acknowledgement. The janitor nodded, a quiet, understated response that reflected his own respect for the moment and for the people who had been witnesses. It was not about receiving praise. It was about the authenticity of shared experience, the mutual recognition of effort and artistry. The atmosphere in the office began to shift subtly. The hierarchy, usually defined by titles, responsibilities, and formalities, felt momentarily irrelevant. For a brief, transformative moment, the space became a place where human talent, vulnerability, and expression held primary importance. The janitor, though still wearing his uniform, was no longer just a background figure. He had become the center of attention, not through self-promotion, but through the undeniable truth of his skill and dedication. The janitor reflected internally on the journey that had led him to this point. He thought about the nights spent practicing alone, the physical strain on his fingers, the frustration of stubborn passages, and the quiet victories that no one had witnessed. He remembered moments of self-doubt, the occasional thought that perhaps it was all futile, and the decision each night to continue, to persist, and to believe in the possibility of something greater. Every note played tonight was a reflection of that persistence, a manifestation of years of quiet resilience. He also recognized the power of the moment beyond himself. The employees, who had seen only his uniform and daily tasks, had been offered a glimpse into the depth of human potential and the capacity for beauty in unexpected places. The CEO, whose assessments and judgments often carried weight in the building, had been reminded that talent and passion could emerge from the most unassuming individuals. The performance, while intimate, had created ripples of impact that would subtly influence perceptions, attitudes, and interactions in ways both visible and invisible. As the janitor stood, stretching his fingers and taking in the room, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Music had always been his refuge, his personal sanctuary, but now it had become a bridge to connection, recognition, and potential opportunity. The act of sharing, even inadvertently, had amplified its significance. He understood that this moment was not an end, but a milestone, a marker along a path that continued beyond the walls of the office, beyond the applause, and beyond the immediate recognition. The CEO, sensing the depth of the moment, took a step closer, his voice softer now, carrying a mix of curiosity and admiration. "How long have you been playing?" he asked, not as a challenge, but as genuine inquiry. The janitor paused, considering the question carefully. "Since I was a child," he replied simply, the words carrying decades of experience, learning, and personal growth. The simplicity of the answer contrasted with the complexity of the journey, highlighting the understated depth of his talent and dedication. There was a quiet pause, a mutual acknowledgement of the shared understanding between two individuals who had previously occupied entirely different roles within the office hierarchy. In that silence, a new respect was established, one grounded not in titles or performance metrics, but in human capability, persistence, and authenticity. The janitor felt the weight and significance of this recognition, understanding that it was rare, valuable, and transformative. The employees, observing the interaction, felt a subtle shift in the energy of the office. They had witnessed more than music. They had witnessed an individual stepping fully into his potential, challenging preconceived notions and reshaping perceptions without a single word beyond the music itself. The impact was profound, yet understated, leaving space for reflection and inspiration rather than overt spectacle. The janitor, now fully aware of the moment's significance, felt a combination of humility and quiet triumph. He recognized that the performance had demonstrated more than technical skill. It had conveyed perseverance, emotional depth, and the courage to express oneself despite uncertainty. It was a lesson in patience, dedication, and the unexpected power of opportunity, all distilled into the simple act of playing music. The CEO, visibly moved, nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words carrying weight beyond their simplicity. The janitor responded with a nod, understanding the sincerity behind them. There was no need for further explanation. The shared experience had communicated more than language could. It was a moment of connection, recognition, and understanding, bridging the gap between observer and performer, between hierarchy and humanity. As the janitor packed away his cleaning supplies and prepared to leave the office for the night, he felt a profound sense of balance and fulfillment. The performance had not only validated his skill, but had reinforced his belief in the power of persistence, passion, and authenticity. He understood that the journey was ongoing, that there would be more challenges, opportunities, and moments to express himself. Yet he also knew that tonight had marked a pivotal point, a moment where effort, talent, and courage had converged in a way that would resonate far beyond the walls of the music room. Walking through the empty corridors, the janitor felt a quiet confidence. The office, once a place of routine and monotony, now held echoes of music, emotion, and shared experience. The impact of the performance would linger, influencing perceptions, inspiring quiet reflection, and reminding all who had witnessed it that extraordinary talent often resides in the most unexpected places. The janitor understood that he had not only shared his music, but had subtly reshaped the environment around him, leaving a lasting impression through dedication, skill, and authenticity. Outside, the city lights shimmered softly against the night sky, reflecting a world of possibility and potential. The janitor paused for a moment, inhaling the cool air and absorbing the calm energy around him. He felt the satisfaction of accomplishment, the joy of self-expression, and the anticipation of what lay ahead. Music had once again proven its transformative power, providing connection, understanding, and recognition in ways that transcended words and roles. And as he walked away from the building, the rhythm of his footsteps echoing faintly in the quiet streets, the janitor felt a sense of peace and purpose. The journey continued, filled with opportunities to explore, create, and connect. The moment had been significant, not merely for the recognition it brought, but for the reaffirmation of his own abilities, the validation of persistent effort, and the realization that even the most unassuming individuals can inspire awe, respect, and profound human connection through talent, courage, and dedication. The next morning, the office felt subtly different. The janitor moved through the hallways as usual, pushing his cart, cleaning quietly, and observing the familiar routines of his coworkers. Yet there was a noticeable shift. Heads turned slightly as he passed, whispers of curiosity floated in the air, and even casual greetings carried a tone of newfound respect. The performance from the previous night had left an impression, and though no one had announced it, everyone seemed aware that something extraordinary had happened. The janitor himself felt a lightness, a renewed sense of purpose that went beyond the routine of daily tasks. Music had always been a personal refuge, but now it had a dimension of public acknowledgement. a subtle validation that inspired him to continue exploring, refining, and sharing his talent. He approached the music room during a quiet moment, fingers brushing over the keys, feeling the familiar texture and the weight of possibility in every note. The piano had become both a mirror and a gateway, reflecting his journey and opening. Doors to unforeseen opportunities knocked by mid-morning. The CEO entered the room unexpectedly. The janitor paused, unsure of the intention behind the visit, yet maintained calm composure. The CEO approached slowly, each step deliberate, carrying a sense of measured consideration. "I've been thinking about last night," the CEO said, voice low and deliberate. "You have a remarkable gift, and it deserves more than secrecy." The janitor listened quietly, nodding without words. There was no need for immediate response. The acknowledgement itself was profound. The CEO continued, explaining that the company had been considering ways to bring more human elements into their workspace, fostering creativity, inspiration, and well-being among employees. Music, he realized, could play a significant role, and the janitor's skill could serve as an example, a catalyst for change. For the janitor, the words carried both excitement and caution. He had always valued his privacy, the quiet intimacy of late-night practice, and the personal journey that had brought him to this moment. Yet he understood the potential impact, the opportunity to share his music, and the chance to influence the environment positively. After a brief discussion, they agreed on a plan: occasional live performances for employees, the creation of a small music program, and opportunities to mentor others who wished to explore music within the office setting. Word of the arrangement spread quietly but effectively. Employees who had once viewed the janitor merely as a background presence began to see him differently. The respect was not immediate admiration, but a gradual recognition of his dedication, talent, and authenticity. People who had been skeptical or indifferent now sought his guidance, asked about his experiences, and shared moments of appreciation. The office dynamic shifted subtly, becoming more inclusive, attentive, and inspired. The janitor found himself adapting to a new rhythm. His days continued with cleaning and maintenance, but evenings, once reserved solely for practice, now carried a balance of preparation, performance, and interaction. He discovered that sharing his talent enriched his own experience, reinforcing confidence, deepening understanding, and inspiring creativity in others. The piano, once a solitary companion, became a bridge to community, connection, and shared joy. The CEO, observing the transformation, recognized the value of this unexpected development. The company culture began to reflect more openness, curiosity, and engagement. Employees found moments of respite, inspiration, and emotional connection through the music, and productivity was complemented by a sense of human enrichment. The janitor, through dedication and authenticity, had inadvertently become a central figure in shaping a positive, inclusive atmosphere. As the weeks progressed, the janitor's confidence grew steadily. He experimented with new compositions, refined interpretations of classic pieces, and introduced creative arrangements. Each performance carried a personal story, a reflection of emotions, challenges, and triumphs. Employees responded not merely to technical skill, but to the authenticity, vulnerability, and expressive depth conveyed in the music. The office had become a space where talent was recognized, nurtured, and celebrated, and the janitor's influence permeated quietly but powerfully. Beyond the office, the janitor began to explore additional opportunities. Invitations from local community centers, educational programs, and cultural organizations emerged, offering platforms to share his skill and mentor others. He approached each engagement with thoughtfulness, balancing personal practice, professional responsibilities, and a growing network of connections. Music had transformed from private passion to public vocation, blending personal fulfillment with societal contribution. Despite the growing attention, the janitor remained grounded. He continued to maintain his role within the office, ensuring that responsibilities were fulfilled with diligence and care. The balance between performance and routine reinforced discipline, humility, and perspective. He recognized that authenticity, dedication, and integrity were as important as skill, and that meaningful impact arose from a combination of talent, effort, and intention. The CEO continued to support the janitor's journey. Occasionally, they would discuss strategy, explore creative ideas, and consider ways to integrate music into broader initiatives. The initial challenge, once posed casually, had evolved into a long-term collaboration that enriched both personal and organizational experiences. Mutual respect deepened, built on recognition of talent, commitment, and shared understanding. Employees increasingly sought engagement with the janitor, whether to learn, observe, or simply enjoy the music. Small gatherings, informal sessions, and occasional collaborative events became part of the office culture. The atmosphere shifted from routine focus to human-centered, emphasizing creativity, empathy, and community. The janitor's influence extended quietly yet decisively, demonstrating the power of individual passion to shape collective experience. He also reflected on personal growth. The journey had strengthened not only technical skill, but emotional resilience, self-awareness, and interpersonal understanding. He had discovered the importance of patience, focus, and adaptability, learning to navigate both solitary practice and public performance. Each day offered opportunities to refine technique, express emotion, and engage meaningfully with the world. The janitor's personal life began to benefit as well. Confidence gained through music translated into social interactions, relationships, and self-perception. Opportunities to connect with other musicians, mentors, and enthusiasts opened new avenues of learning and friendship. Music had become a vehicle for growth, connection, and fulfillment, blending personal aspiration with community engagement. As months passed, recognition extended beyond the immediate office environment. Local media, cultural institutions, and social organizations highlighted the story of an unlikely musician whose dedication transformed not only personal circumstances, but also inspired an entire workplace. The narrative emphasized perseverance, authenticity, and the unexpected emergence of talent in unassuming places. The janitor became a symbol of resilience and the power of passion, showing that opportunities often arise for those willing to cultivate skill quietly, patiently, and authentically. Through all this attention, the janitor remained true to the principles that had guided him: consistent practice, humility, emotional expression, and careful balance between personal and public life. He continued to play with focus, intentionality, and authenticity, ensuring that each performance retained the emotional resonance and personal integrity that had defined the initial journey. The office, once a landscape of routine, hierarchy, and unremarkable patterns, now thrived with subtle transformation. Music became a core aspect of daily life, inspiring creativity, fostering empathy, and creating meaningful connections among employees. The janitor's influence, grounded in talent and dedication, had reshaped perceptions, bridged gaps, and elevated human experience within the workspace. Over time, the janitor recognized the profound lesson of the journey: that talent, when combined with perseverance, authenticity, and courage, could transcend boundaries, inspire others, and create opportunities previously unimaginable. The journey had begun with a simple challenge, a casual remark, and had grown into a transformative narrative of personal growth, human connection, and societal impact. Even as recognition grew, the janitor continued to approach each day with humility, discipline, and focus. Music remained central, not as a means to an end, but as an enduring expression of creativity, emotion, and personal truth. Each note played was a reaffirmation of the journey, a continuation of dedication, and a bridge between self-expression and community impact. The CEO, now a consistent supporter and admirer, acknowledged that the journey was ongoing. They continued discussions on creative programs, mentorship, and opportunities for cultural enrichment within the office and beyond. The janitor's influence expanded quietly but meaningfully.